Early medieval France lived under a simple rule: serious writing happened in Latin. It served the church, the law, and the people who ran kingdoms. A farmer, a soldier, a merchant heard another language every day, but none of that reached the page. Latin looked stable and universal, so it felt safe, yet it created a gap. Most people spoke, but only a few could read what was written. Over time, that spoken language changed, slowly drifting away from Latin until it sounded like something new. Administrators and bishops still wrote Latin, but they faced a practical problem. How did you make an oath, an order, or a promise understood by everyone who had to follow it? The solution did not begin as art. It began as necessity. A few lines in the common tongue could carry more power than perfect Latin. That decisive break appeared in 842, in a political crisis between rival Carolingian leaders. Two brothers, Charles the Bald and Louis the German, swore mutual loyalty in front of troops, and the words got recorded in the languages their men actually understood. These became known as the Strasbourg Oaths. They sounded like early French and early German, not Latin. One document proved a new idea. The vernacular belonged in writing. Literature followed later. In the 11th century, French writing stopped being only small traces and started acting like a public force. The first big form that dominated was the epic, built to be remembered and repeated. These were stories of loyalty, war, and faith, carried by performers and shaped for audiences who listened more than they read. The Song of Roland became the model, a hero tested to the limit, a community watching itself in the mirror. This epic style mattered because it gave French a job to do. It held history, values, and political pride in a language people recognized as their own. The battles felt distant, but the message stayed close: serve, endure, and belong. The poems used fixed rhythms and strong scenes, so they traveled easily from place to place. What spread with them was not just a story, but a shared way of speaking about honor and betrayal. Then, in the 12th century, another force rose beside the epic: romance. Instead of armies and sacrifice, it turned toward love, desire, and the rules of courtly life. Troubadours in the south and trouvères in the north shaped songs and poems that treated love as discipline, not just feeling. This new taste pushed French literature into private emotions and refined manners. The language proved it could sing, not only command. By the 13th century, French writing no longer belonged mainly to castles and courts. Towns grew, trade tightened its networks, and a louder public formed in streets, markets, and workshops. With it came a sharper taste. People still enjoyed tales of heroes and refined love, but they also wanted stories that cut, exposed, and embarrassed. A new kind of comedy took hold, and it aimed downward at everyday tricks and everyday desire. These short comic tales were called fabliaux. They moved fast, stayed close to ordinary life, and treated status like a costume that slipped easily. Priests looked greedy, husbands looked foolish, wives looked clever, and everyone looked human. The point was not moral improvement. The point was the sting. As these stories circulated, listeners learned something important. French could mock power just as well as it could praise it. At the same time, another form travelled widely: allegory, where ideas acted like people and arguments became drama. The most famous example, the Romance of the Rose, unfolded as a long debate about love, desire, and society itself. It drew readers beyond the court, into towns and universities, where educated audiences argued over its meaning. Literature started to live in discussion, not just performance, and that changed who it served. In the 14th century, the ground shifted. The 100 Years' War dragged on, and whole regions changed hands again and again. Then the plague struck, killing so many that daily life and old certainties broke apart. Power looked less stable, the future felt less predictable, and writing changed with it. Literature stopped pretending the world was ordered. It asked what a person owed to others when everything around them failed. Out of that pressure came a new kind of author, Christine de Pizan, a widow who supported her family by writing, stepped into public debate with a clear purpose. She defended women's worth, argued against easy cruelty in popular stories, and demanded moral responsibility from rulers. Her work treated writing as action, not ornament. In a time of political chaos, she used reasoned argument and personal experience to claim authority in French. A different voice pushed the personal even further. François Villon wrote from the edge of society, with crime, fear, and regret never far away. His poems sounded like a confession and an accusation at once, against hypocrisy, against empty virtue, and against himself. He mixed street language with formal verse, turning insecurity into style. Together, these writers showed how crisis forced French literature to look inward and judge the world more sharply. In the 16th century, France entered the Renaissance and writing changed pace. Printing presses multiplied books, lowered their cost, and spread ideas faster than any messenger ever had. At the same time, humanism pushed readers back toward Greek and Roman texts, not to copy them blindly, but to learn how language could carry knowledge. French no longer served only for songs or stories, it competed with Latin as a tool for serious thought. Into this new world stepped François Rabelais, a writer who stretched French prose until it felt limitless. His giant heroes, Gargantua and Pantagruel, carried comedy, crude jokes, and wild imagination, yet the target stayed clear: ignorance, blind authority, and empty schooling. He piled up words, invented new ones, and mixed learned references with street language. The result proved a blunt lesson. French prose handled debate, satire, and big ideas at full speed. Poetry changed just as sharply. A group of young poets, later called the Pléiades, decided French deserved the same ambition as the classical languages. Joachim du Bellay argued for enriching French rather than apologizing for it. Pierre de Ronsard chased a powerful, musical style that aimed high and demanded respect. They borrowed forms, images, and discipline from antiquity, then reshaped them for their own tongue. From that point on, French poetry reached for greatness on purpose. In the 17th century, French writing followed a new command: order. The state wanted language to look stable and ideas to sound controlled. In 1635, Cardinal Richelieu backed the Académie Française, a small group tasked with setting rules for French. This was not just grammar, it was power. When the state blessed a good style, it pushed writers toward clarity, balance, and what sounded proper. The stage became the testing ground for this ideal. Theatre reached wider audiences and forced writers to prove their craft in public. Pierre Corneille built tragedies around duty, honour, and hard choices, where characters faced moral pressure instead of chaos. Then Jean Racine tightened tragedy even further, stripping stories down to passion, guilt, and consequence. Their plays showed what Classicism demanded: strict form, controlled emotion, and lessons that hit without preaching. Comedy carried the same discipline, but it attacked different targets. Molière exposed hypocrisy, religious posturing, social climbing, false learning, and the laughter landed as moral judgment. In verse and short narratives, Jean de La Fontaine did something similar with fables, using animals and simple plots to deliver sharp human truths. By the end of the century, literature served as a mirror the state approved of, entertaining, elegant, and quietly instructive. In the 18th century, writing stopped behaving like a polite ornament and started acting like a tool. People argued with it. They tested power with it. A new kind of public conversation grew outside official institutions, in salons where hosts gathered thinkers, writers, and readers to trade ideas. What mattered was not noble birth, but the ability to persuade. Literature entered debate and stayed there. This pressure produced a huge ambition to collect knowledge and make it usable. Denis Diderot led that effort through the Encyclopédie, a vast reference work that aimed to explain the world without bowing to tradition. It spread new ways of thinking about science, work, and politics. Authorities tried to block it because it quietly trained readers to question. The page became a classroom that no official controlled. Some writers pushed harder and reached far beyond scholars. Voltaire used sharp, clear prose to mock injustice and expose hypocrisy, turning irony into a weapon. Jean-Jacques Rousseau took a different route, insisting that society itself shaped people and that legitimacy needed consent. Together, these voices expanded what the public sphere meant. Literature did not just reflect power, it measured it, criticized it, and demanded new rules. In the early 1800s, a new generation rejected the old rules of Classicism. It had demanded balance, restraint, and fixed forms. Romantic writers demanded the opposite: freedom, intensity, and the right to mix the noble with the ordinary. Victor Hugo led that rupture. He treated literature as a force that could shake public taste, not just follow it. The novel and the theatre stopped obeying polite symmetry. Emotion and conflict took the lead. But the century did not stay in pure passion for long. As cities grew and money reshaped lives, writers turned their eyes outward. Honoré de Balzac built a vast series of novels that tracked society like an investigator, linking characters across books to show how ambition and class worked in practice. Stendhal pushed the same shift in a sharper way. He focused on individual desire colliding with social limits. The modern world started to look measurable, not mythical. Then Gustave Flaubert raised the bar again, not by preaching, but by control. He treated style as a discipline where every sentence had to earn its place. His realism avoided easy heroes and easy lessons. Ordinary life, with its frustrations and illusions, became worthy of serious art. That choice changed the novel's job. It no longer existed mainly to celebrate ideals or entertain. It existed to observe, to judge quietly through precision, and to show how people really lived. By the late 1800s, many writers no longer trusted the old promise that novels should simply mirror life. A movement called symbolism pushed back. Instead of explaining everything, poets like Stéphane Mallarmé and Paul Verlaine relied on suggestion, rhythm, and hidden links. Meaning became something the reader had to chase. Form started to matter as much as subject. Literature stopped acting like a window. It started acting like a puzzle. After World War I, that puzzle turned into a deliberate shock. Surrealism treated logic as the problem, not the solution. André Breton set out its rules and defended writing that followed dreams, accidents, and sudden leaps of thought. The avant-garde treated the page like a laboratory. In the novel, Marcel Proust pushed experimentation in another direction, using memory and long, precise sentences to show how a life felt from the inside, moment by moment. World War II raised harsher questions, and many writers aimed straight at them. Albert Camus wrote about a world that seemed indifferent, where meaning had to be fought for. Jean-Paul Sartre argued that people created themselves through choices and that writing carried responsibility. After the war, some novelists rejected the comforting idea of plot and stable characters. The Nouveau Roman dismantled familiar storytelling, forcing readers to rebuild meaning from fragments. By the early 21st century, French literature no longer stayed inside France. It travelled with people, schools, publishers, and screens. French served as a shared tool for writers from Europe, Africa, the Caribbean, the Middle East, and North America, each pushing it in new directions. The result looked less like one tradition and more like a moving map. That shift mattered. A language that once barely separated from Latin now carried stories across continents. This new reality also ran through institutions that decided what got noticed. Big prizes, especially the Prix Goncourt, turned a novel into a national event and often into a global product. Book fairs, radio, television, and later streaming interviews expanded that effect. Translation did the rest, carrying French-language books into English, Spanish, Arabic, and more, while foreign bestsellers flowed back into French. French literature became a crossroads, not a closed room. Yet the space stayed contested. Writers argued over who belonged, which French counted as good, and how colonial history still shaped publishing power. New voices pushed against old gatekeepers, and readers followed them online. Blogs, social media, podcasts, and self-publishing changed discovery, criticism, and even the idea of an author. Literature mixed with film, rap, graphic novels, and games. In the end, French writing reached further than ever, and it fought harder over what it meant.